I gotta get a new computer because mine is slow, mine is crap. Huh? Mine is crap, it's only like that fast. I waste nanoseconds a day.
Believe it or not, stand-up comic Glenn Foster makes his living in the information business.
As a comedian, you're always looking for sources of humor, and particularly new sources of humor. And you don't get any newer than the internet. It's like as soon as somebody thinks of something or somebody hears of something, bang, there it is up on the internet, you know, in a newsgroup somewhere. And there's so many of them, and it's like a million conversations going on at once, except that you can go in and pick which conversation, you know.
Mr. Foster has been scouring the newsgroup section of the internet, known as Usenet, to check out which are the most popular topics under discussion. And he's discovered that by far, the busiest newsgroups are focused on either sex or humor. The citizens of cyberspace, it appears, are interested in either having a good time or a good laugh, much like real life on the internet.
In a network of computers, it's not the MIPS and chips and whatnot that's most important. It's what goes on between the people using them that makes them really powerful. A reminder from Sun Microsystems, proud to support this PBS program.
I'm Scott Simon. If you think of cyberspace as a kind of community, then newsgroups are the town halls, parks, or bulletin boards. Newsgroups are the places on the internet where people with common interests can meet to share news, gossip, and opinions. They're places to encounter some people you might actually like to meet, and others you're glad you don't have to. Newsgroups are changing some of our ideas about social life on the internet. Newsgroups are the bulletin board of the internet, a place where literally millions of people gather to debate, preach, get information, or just leave a group message for anyone who cares about the same subject. The range of topics spreads across a huge field of interest. You can log on to newsgroups from anywhere there's an internet connection, and internet connections are springing up everywhere. At last count, there were just over 13,000 newsgroups on the net. And in any one of them, there might be 1,000 people or more posting information, arguments, points for discussion. Behind each of these topic headings, there might be a raging debate, a plea for help or understanding, a simple information exchange, or just common ground for people all over the wired world who share an interest in everything from badgers to bazookas. And like life, there should always be time for a laugh.
Like I put a post about the OJ trial, and I said the fact that he's been found not guilty reaffirms our faith in the system. So, because imagine what would happen if we suddenly, just for a moment, believed that money can't buy anything.
Oh, well, world's changing, huh? Big changes. It's the information age. Oh, that's all I know about it. Desperately trying to keep up, though. Everybody is. What a panic, huh? What a panic. Oh, we have to build an information superhighway. What, not enough information getting through, huh? We need an information dirt road, huh? Slow down some of this information.
Hi, excuse us.
But the reality is that both the dirt road and the superhighway are getting more than a little crowded. At last estimate, there were 4 million regular participants in the various newsgroups, and there appears to be no end to it. In the normal world, communication at this scale would leave the whole process open to major confusion unless it was in the hands of a big administration.
That would look very graceful.
Well, meet the big administration of newsgroups. David Lawrence.
In some ways, I am the big administration, and at 240 pounds, it's no slight administration. But it's not, there's no formal organization, and that's a reason that there is no formal organization that, for example, could be held accountable in some way. There's no corporation. There's no nonprofit center handling this. And that's one of the reasons that people donate the time. They recognize the need for it, but Usenet being distributed all over the world, for example, what if the Americans tried to say, okay, we're going to run the net now? The Europeans and the Asians would be up in arms. The same thing happened if anybody tried to actually assert control over the net, say, I am the body that controls the net. Much of the net would rebel against it, and even those that didn't totally rebel against it then would probably find it to be a wonderful target for things such as lawsuits or other types of harassment. So the volunteerism really comes out of the sense of wanting to keep Usenet somewhat very flexible and liberal and almost like an anarchy, but not quite. And Calvin and Hobbes is, of course, one of my favorites.
David Lawrence seems addicted to bulletin boards. At Usenet, his responsibility includes overseeing the applications from various people who want to be included in the official newsgroup list. It's a mandate he has to fit in with his day job with one of the large internet providers just outside of Washington, D.C., where his days are filled with doing the type of things that normally happen in large internet corporations.
Too slow. Too slow.
And if he has to keep his head down at work, David Lawrence has learned to do the same thing with the heated crossfire that can come up among the newsgroups.
Most of them tend to be along religious or national lines. For example, in the religious area, people have been upset about Scientology, or they've been, the Muslims have been upset about a news group for Ahmadi Islamic people. And in the political area, the Chinese were very upset when the Tibetans wanted a new news group, and the Greeks were very upset when the Yugoslavians, who had an area called Macedonia when their country breakup, wanted a group about Macedonia because the Greeks felt that they owned that name. But that's not always the way it is, too. People have been very upset, for example, about reorganizing the cooking news groups or the Disney news groups because they feel like they had a certain sense of community that they wanted to retain, and they felt that if that one broad group were split into different groups on particular subtopics, that they were going to lose that sense of community.
There are two major newsgroup lists on Usenet, the official sanctioned list and another unofficial list called Alt.dot, where it is essentially a communications free-for-all, and one can only marvel at the ingenuity of the human imagination. Individual internet service providers usually put the official news groups onto their systems, but they don't necessarily take all the Alt.dot groups. Alt.dot started when a cooking group got into a tiff about what their news group should be called, and when they couldn't get the governing body to agree to the name they wanted, they insisted on starting their own alternate location, hence Alt.dot. The cooking group was quickly followed by a news group whose priority was, and we're not sure how this follows, Sex.dot.
People that wanted the sex news group all said, fine, we're going to create groups about human sexuality under the alt hierarchy because there are no rules there, and people that want to carry it can go ahead and get this group. And eventually the drugs, people that were interested in drugs, whether recreationally or for whatever other reason, found they had the same kind of liability, and they went into alt. And with the advent of alt.sex and alt.drugs, we of course had to have alt.rock and roll.
Alt.dot groups may revel in their individuality, but this doesn't mean that the official lists don't also have their major debates. Tempers have been known to flare over issues like whether or not pet fish should go under Sci for science or Rec for recreation. It might not sound like something that would normally get your fins in a twist, but it's just one of those topics that hooked the organizers of Usenet.
It was proposed under the Sci hierarchy, even though most people saw it very strongly as a recreational type group and therefore should have gone under Rec. But the proponents were proposing it under Sci because they said that their claim was that because it had, discussing fish, of course, has scientific components to it, but it was widely viewed that the real reason that they wanted to do that was because the Sci hierarchy had, on average, better propagation. It got to more sites than the Rec hierarchy did. And people were very up in arms about that. That's not how newsgroup naming should go.
At the level of fish, it all seems remarkably innocent. But there is, unfortunately, another side of newsgroups, which one committed user wants newcomers to the net to know about. For the most part, the internet is a remarkably safe place to play, but there are dangerous exceptions. Isabel Redondo is a research assistant in the pharmacology department at Dalhousie University and considers herself an internet veteran. She insists she now won't make the same mistake she did when she started.
I suppose I started trading email with this one person. We shared the same interests. He was awfully nice, and for months it was just an exchange of email. He was from the southern states, and I thought this was my first time on the internet, and I thought it was so neat. Here I am talking to someone who's miles and miles away, and no one had explained to me. No one knew, really, and no one really had a lot of experience of what could happen or whatever. It didn't occur to me that because this person was writing me 2-hour-long messages once a day, that I should be concerned, you know, because I was sending him back one-liners or nothing at all. I don't think he really meant to harass me at first. It may have started just as an innocent enough friendship, but I suppose it's an easy medium to be really wrapped up in, and I suppose it just got a little bit obsessive. It's at best annoying and at worst harassment, I think. I'm not sure if I would call him a stalker, but I suppose by definition it would be, yeah.
For Ms. Redondo, the basic concept of newsgroups was supportive. She met people who shared existing interests or introduced her to new ones. Usenet became a big extended family. But even with all of her online experience, Isabel Redondo found herself being harassed for the second time.
We met in a news group, and we had that in common. We talked about it for a while. Very intelligent, very well read. This person was an academic and a professional. And we became friends, I guess, rather quickly because we could communicate so well. He has a family of his own. He lives abroad. And I suppose the personal things start creeping up little by little, and you don't really notice. And you kind of wince at first, and then you wince a little more, and before you know it, you've accepted a lot of things that in the beginning you wouldn't have, because you have been friends with this person again. And then when the poem started, I okay, this is, you know, I tried to terminate it, and he did call me as well, and he actually did come to see me, and he had a business trip, and he decided to make a detour and come to Halifax, and I met him just long enough to say that this was it, this was enough, and his behavior was inappropriate, and so that was a very high pressure situation as well, but one that hopefully now is under control.
Isabel Redondo was lucky. She came out of both experiences relatively unscathed, but it did affect her.
I'd say for a year after this happened, and during, of course, the time that I was dealing with this, I felt quite vulnerable, and I felt a little bit paranoid even. But again, that's not too different from what you do in real life. I mean, you have your bad experiences and your good experiences. And I have been on the net for 6 years, and I can't tell you how many wonderful people I've met through the net, and how many good experiences I have had. I'm fond of saying this, it is a jungle out there, but I like it that way. I really do.
It didn't all start out as a jungle. It started as a way to establish a simple electronic bulletin board between Duke University and the University of North Carolina, a few miles down the road. In fact, the real fathers of Usenet were a handful of graduate students who in 1979 wanted a central location where they could leave and pick up messages about computers and chess.
I wish I had a computer to help me with this.
Tom Truscott was one of those students.
I don't think any of us had any idea what it was going to turn into. In fact, I think we tried not to think more than 3 or 4 years ahead, because in computing things change that quickly. So yes, we were rather astounded. In fact, even from the first, we were surprised at the number of topics people wanted to talk about. Even people in computing didn't always want to talk about computers. It's just back here to the left.
Usenet turned out to be a huge development in the history of communications, so you would think that part of the hardware that made it possible would be in a museum somewhere. Well, it's not.
Back in the dungeon where old computers go to die.
The PDP-L 1170 is now gathering dust in the basement of Duke University, visited only occasionally like a distant aunt in an old folks' home by the pioneers who remember her when she was young, exciting, and played a big part in their lives.
Using it. We ought to be able to turn it on. No power. When we first started working on Usenet, it did occur to us that it might be useful for more than just graduate students in computer science talking to each other about bugs in the Unix operating system. But at the same time, there just weren't that many computers in the world. This was before the Macintosh or the IBM PC. There were a lot of mainframe computers, but ironically, they just seemed too big for something like Usenet. It really needed to be a smaller, more friendly machine. So initially, we felt that it was going to be used by people in computer science, talking about whatever it is people in computer science do. In fact, we joked about improper uses of the net, such as selling used cars. It just seemed like a hoot that someone in New Jersey would sell a car and someone in Massachusetts would say, oh yes, bring it up here and I'll test drive it.
But in fact, it didn't take long before the early users realized that Usenet was a perfect vehicle for things like classified advertising. And Tom Truscott remembers the first item and the negotiations that surrounded it.
What happened first was someone in New Jersey wanted to sell their dinette set, and they put an ad out asking for I think it was $25 for the set. And someone from Australia wrote back and said, does that include shipping?
Other universities soon started linking up with Usenet, and the system was a fixture between computer students even before the internet became generally available. But there was a snag. The connection costs between computers were expensive because they relied on phone lines. When the internet came along, Usenet was suddenly available without long-distance charges, and that opened it up to the world.
There were sites that were spending over $250,000 a year on their long-distance phone bills to ship this news around. So people were predicting the death of the net as a result. In fact, this has been a recurring theme that the Usenet is in imminent danger of dying out. Fortunately, each time this happened, something came along to cure the problem. And in the case of the internet, it gave us a very high-speed, high-throughput way to send the news around.
Sending the news around has made Tom Truscott and the other Usenet pioneers legends on the internet, for they laid the cornerstones that evolved into this huge network open to anyone with a net connection. But because it is so open and so popular, there are some inherent dangers. So if you are new to Newsgroups, Isabel Redondo has some practical advice for you.
They start asking where you live, what do you do, anything really on a personal nature that they shouldn't need or they shouldn't ask. Well, don't do it. Don't write to these people, don't talk to these people, and don't reveal your name or even your account name. You can post anonymously. I usually don't do it because by now I think that I'm savvy enough to field any problems that might arise. And I don't post all that often. And when I do, it's to news groups that are fairly safe. Rec food cooking, rec food coffee, no problem. But, and again, once you get into mainly news groups, there are so many things that are wonderful and weird out there. And when you first get into it, you don't want to go for these safe things. You want to see what's out there on the weird and wonderful. Well, if you post to alt tasteless, it is going to be tasteless. If you post to alt sex, they are going to talk about that. And it's probably not a good idea to give out your phone number to alt personals, unless you're interested in that kind of thing. So you have your best line of defense is yourself and your common sense. Watch where you're going, watch who you talk to, and watch for personal comments. And if someone starts harassing you, there's peer pressure. The people on the net are, for every objectionable person on the net, there's 10 who are more than willing to help you, and they're wonderful people. So you'll always have a support network.
For the most part, newsgroups contain a basic underlying humanity. And at its core, there is a distinct and sensitive community here, where for at least one young man, difficult and confusing times were made that much easier.
I did feel that I was the only person who felt like this in my school and in the city, but I knew that there were others out there. I didn't know what their lives were like, but I knew that they were there, and in certain news groups, I could talk to people about this.
A few years ago, Mark, like a lot of other 16-year-olds in the history of the world, was going through that awful stage of being confused and bewildered by his sexuality. For Mark, it was an even more difficult time than most, so he went to the news groups for some answers.
Well, the original posting that I put in the news group questioned me being gay, and I just questioned it a lot and said, is there any way I could change it and deny it? And I tried to point out characteristics of myself that I thought were gay, but I later found out they weren't typically gay, even those. But basically the gist of the posting I first sent was, am I gay? Some things that I wondered were some ways that I acted. There's a lot of stereotypes about gay people, and I felt that I might have had some. I got about 15 to 20 responses, of course, since the internet, from all over the world. And basically, I got a whole different myriad of responses. One person said, one person congratulated me on this, says that he wasted 9 years when he was younger. He says he congratulated me on doing this at 16 years old, and he didn't do it until he was 25, and that was 9 years. And another person compared to being gay with being straight. They said, how would you proceed if they thought I was straight, but I didn't want to be? And I found that a good comparison, and it really helped me understand that being gay is natural, just like being straight is.
It was the realization that these feelings were not all that uncommon and that he was not alone that gave this young man some extra courage to deal with it. Although at first even his mother had trouble accepting the news and started looking for someone or something to blame.
I was never able to have her understand for a long time that it wasn't the internet that corrupted me, it was the internet that helped me. You can't really be corrupted to become gay. You can choose to be gay, but you can't really be influenced. And because of that, she realizes the internet was not a negative influence. It was an information tool. Now she doesn't see the internet as a big evil thing that has converted people into being gay anymore. She sees it as very helpful now. I do feel there's a sense of community, and I wish that I had responded to more of the responses that I got, but there were so many, I couldn't respond to them all. But I wish now, thinking back, I wish I had kept communication with all those people, because I'm sure they would be, all of them would be very happy to know that they've helped me.
So at least in one very specific case, the news groups of Usenet have had a remarkable effect in improving human communication. For they give us more than just a community of special interests, or a platform where people can sound off, or even just tell jokes. Usenet has provided the arena where, properly used, there's the capacity to put the world's problems into some sort of context, to remove old barriers, touch people who need help, and replace fear and ignorance with knowledge and some understanding. All the things we need to sustain life, real life, on the internet. If you'd like to start exploring news groups, you might begin here, the Usenet Info Center Launchpad. Usenet pioneer Tom Truscott says this is the best online source for general Usenet information. Here you'll find the basics, like where and how to post a message. This is a good place to browse an extensive list of Usenet groups. I'll just click on Rec. For recreation, and I can find discussion groups for everything from aquariums to juggling. But unlike juggling, you don't have to use both hands. At a site called Deja News, you can browse all the different news groups and then zero in on topics that interest you. It's called a power search. I'll type in country music, and here's a list of groups who want to talk about country music. Some news groups might promise you the moon and the stars, but here are some that actually delivered. They're called news groups, at least somewhat astronomy related. As you can see, they aren't just talk. They're pictures. You can download heavenly sights from this site. There's so many news groups out there, there's even a news group that discusses news groups. If you need some help or applications for downloading pictures, or if you want more information about news groups, we hope you'll visit our site. It has links to everything you've seen. Here's how to find us, http://www.pbs.org. Until next time, I'm Scott Simon.
In a network of computers, it's not the MIPS and chips and whatnot that's most important. It's what goes on between the people using them that makes them really powerful. A reminder from Sun Microsystems, proud to support this PBS program.
This is PBS.